On the afternoon of 9th October 1986, 9-year-old best friends Nicola Fellows and Karen Hadaway went out to play on their Brighton estate. As night began to fall, there was no sign of the girls.
What time were they last seen?
At about 5:30.
I mean, this will be as big as it gets. 2 young girls go missing is, for the family, the scariest thing that can happen.
The next day, their bodies would be discovered concealed in a local woodland. The crime would become known as the Babes in the Wood murders.
So far, 10,000 people have been questioned by detectives.
But the guilty man would walk free.
This whole case is one of the biggest and most disastrous failures of the criminal justice system.
He's a killer, he got off it. What is he going to do next?
Now he's got a taste for it, and now he's going to escalate.
I've got nothing to say. I'm not responsible for this. I have nothing to do with it. I'm innocent.
This is the story of how one of Britain's most despicable child killers very nearly evaded justice.
He really was a psychopath. He thought that he was invincible.
My name is Peter James, and I make a living as a writer of crime fiction. I've been fortunate that the stories I've created have found an audience across the world. Most of my books have been set right here, in my hometown of Brighton on the south coast. It's a place I love dearly.
I built my career as a crime thriller author, often by taking inspiration from some of the most heinous and horrific crimes that have happened both here in the UK and in other countries of the world. But in 1986, a horrific double murder happened here in my home city of Brighton and Hove that shocked me, and it shocked the entire nation. And it's something that stayed with me far longer than any other crime I've encountered.
Away from the bright lights and beautiful seafront, there's another part to this city, and it was the setting for one of the most despicable double murders imaginable. This is the suburb of Moulsecoomb, on the outskirts of Brighton. Today, Moulsecoomb is a changed place. It's a pleasant residential estate. Back in 1986, it had a real reputation for criminality and violence.
It was a 1920s council estate with an old-fashioned attitude to policing, looking after their own. They like to do things their own way, and they like to sort things out, so we wouldn't be the first people that they would talk to.
It was on this estate in 1986 the unthinkable happened. On a cold October afternoon, 2 9-year-old girls would vanish without trace.
Where were these children last seen?
They were last seen over at the Coldine shop at the bottom of Coldine Lane.
What time were they last seen?
At about 5:30. It's not like her to go too far away unless she's going usually to a friend's house.
And who am I speaking to now, Mrs.?
Hadaway.
Who's the other mother, Mrs.?
Mrs. Fellows.
Right, and they're 2 9-year-old girls?
2 9-year-olds.
The missing girls were Nicola Fellows and her best friend, Karen Hadaway. They'd been outside playing together. It was when they hadn't returned home for dinner and the night was closing in that their worried parents raised the alarm.
I've been walking around for hours, I've nearly collapsed.
Yeah. Well, I'll get somebody to come up and see you.
Okay,
all right.
We were actually in Moulsecoomb at the time we got the call, so we were there within seconds. Both the mums were very distressed. So it was now 8 o'clock. They'd been missing since 5:30, and it wasn't a very pleasant evening. It was cold, it was drizzly. It just felt wrong. It felt that 2 girls would not be outside for fun on a night like this.
Realising the gravity of the situation, Brighton police immediately organised a search party.
So we're talking about a pretty massive search.
This is as big as it gets, really. You know, young girls go missing on a cold October evening is scary. Every available police officer will be out there looking. Community will be out there looking. Members of the family will be out there looking.
It was now beyond 10 o'clock. In our heart of hearts, most of us thought this doesn't look good at all.
Despite the combined efforts of the police and the local community, it's now the early hours of the morning of 10th October 1986, and the two girls are still missing.
We went home at about 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning, and obviously my wife was asleep in bed, and I went upstairs and I looked in on my daughter and thought, you know, Susan and Michelle, can't do that.
When the search resumes the next day, the focus is on a place known as Wild Park, a large woodland only minutes from the girls' homes.
But as the hours passed, it seemed an increasingly slender hope that the girls had run away.
In the short time that I'd gone, there were literally hundreds of officers. I was very impressed that it had rolled into action the way it had.
The mother of Karen Hadaway said today she was sure that her daughter would not have gone with a stranger.
Tragically, it was not long before everyone's worst fears were confirmed.
The two young girls missing since yesterday evening have been found. The 16-year-old boy who joined in the hunt found the bodies not far from where the two girls lived.
And this is the Wild Park. And it's in these woods, probably 50 yards below where I'm standing, that the terrible murders occurred. It's incredible to me just how close to the homes of these two little girls this happened.
For Nicola's mother, Susan, it's all been too much and she's had to leave the area. Her husband, Barry, says the news was too much to take.
When she was first told, she just screamed. You know, I mean, screamed. I collapsed over at the Wild Park. I was just a heap. I was told they were sexually assaulted.
I always think it's such a tranquil, beautiful setting that it's always hard to imagine the kind of horror. I think the writer Nicky French once said that bad things happen on beautiful days, and what's also so true is that bad things happen in beautiful places, too.
Graham, in a case like this, where do the police begin their search for a suspect?
Tragically, most people who are murdered are killed by somebody they know. So the police will always start with looking at family, friends, associates.
It was almost 20 hours after the girls had gone missing that they were actually found. With all these resources looking in a relatively confined space, you'd wonder how on earth that was happening. It's because this particular den was not the sort of thing you would stumble across, which started me to think it's not a stranger who's done this, it's someone who knows this area intimately, who goes there and will have been to this den before.
From our inquiries, it would seem a distinct possibility that the murderer was known to the two girls. This would be one explanation as to how both girls were inveigled into the Wild Park.
In October 1986, the bodies of two 9-year-old girls were discovered in woodland in Brighton.
So far, 10,000 people have been questioned by detectives in what's turning out to be the largest ever murder hunt in Sussex.
The bodies had been discovered by two teenagers helping in the search. But also nearby was a local man searching with his dog, a man known to the girls, Russell Bishop.
He was a strange sort of character from the start, and it was odd that we were sort of sanctioning and condoning him wandering around with his dog, pretending to be a sniffer dog, or he claimed it was a sniffer dog. So he was putting himself in and around the search.
He asks one of the girls' mother if he can have some of their clothing to give the dog the scent, and he gets it. He gets Karen's coat, And he makes a big show in front of the police officer of rubbing the coat on the dog's nose and saying, well, the dog has the scent now, the dog will track the girls. As a sidebar to what's going on here, this is very strange. Why would you do that?
The first police officer on the murder scene was PC Paul Smith.
I was down on the footpath near the road with Russell Bishop. I knew he was a friend of the family, so I just assumed he was out doing what everybody else was looking for the girls.
He said, I'm not going to search anymore. So Paul says to him, well, why is that? We've got to carry on searching. So Russell says something really strange. He says, no, if I find them, I'm going to get nicked for it.
And then there's a couple of 16-year-old lads shouted from the slope, we found them. We found the girls. He went running up the slope, and I followed him. There was the two dead girls. Nicky Fellows was on her back with Karen Hadaway laying on her. I took the pulse, and they were stone cold like marble.
How did you feel at the moment you saw the girls?
I mean, it's bad enough finding dead bodies and finding them in some terrible conditions, but when it's children, it is really, really get to you, you know. But, yeah, and still does, really.
As the investigation now escalates from missing person to murder inquiry, Detective Constable John Morton's team is sent in to secure the crime scene.
At 5 o'clock in the afternoon, I got a call asking me to come to the park where some local lads had found the bodies of the two girls. They had their heads down and were absolutely deflated. I was totally amazed when I saw the other guy, who turned out to be Russell Bishop. And it was strange because he was standing there shuffling his feet and whistling out loud. And I was just absolutely stunned because I'd never encountered that behaviour from anybody at a major crime scene ever.
Bizarre.
Bizarre, absolutely. So they explained to me how they'd come across the bodies, and I said, could you take me to them? I saw both girls had deep cyanosis. They'd obviously been there a long time. I thought now's my chance to talk to Bishop. So I asked him what happened, and he said to me, I jumped over the tree and went to the girls, and I felt both of their necks for a pulse. And I thought, well, that's really strange, because unless you've sort of been a first aid or something like that, it's much easier to go to the wrists.
Did you have an immediate suspicion, John, from his behaviour?
Oh, absolutely. And also, from what the other two had said, I knew that at that point, Russell Bishop had not gone to within 15 feet of those girls on that afternoon.
Russell Bishop's suspicious behaviour at the crime scene now makes him the focus of police attention.
The spotlight is definitely on Bishop at this point now. Why would he necessarily go and engage with a police officer and start sort of saying, well, I might be a suspect? Why would he bring his dog along when there's police dogs there? He said he felt the girl's neck for a pulse. Is he doing that because he wants to be somebody prominent, or is he doing that so that he's kind of building his alibis, building his defences up in advance?
For an offender to inject themselves into the investigation is not unusual, and it's something that we see. A sane person thinks, why on earth would you do that? One theory is that they get off on being so close to the fallout of what they've done. But I think for him, it was more a case of preempting being accused.
Bishop is a 20-year-old unemployed labourer who is well known within the local community.
By most of the accounts, by people on the estate, he was regarded as a bit of a joke. He supplemented his income with petty crime. He told tall tales, and people found him quite pathetic and quite insignificant, really. I think he was a Walter Mitty kind of character.
In another crucial development, police now have a witness who places Bishop near the woods with the girls on the night they disappeared.
This is one of the things that I think really put him into the focus of being the prime suspect. The other thing about him saying that he went there is because he described the girls exactly in the position that they were laying. Now, there's no way he would have seen that from the position that he was actually at.
As the net begins to close on Bishop, a massive wider murder investigation is still ongoing. and the police are about to make a vital breakthrough.
People had brought in things that they thought might be connected with the disappearance of the children. And there was the sweatshirt, the blue sweatshirt.
A few hundred yards from where the girls' bodies had been discovered, a blue Pinto sweatshirt had been found discarded on a footpath.
The scene investigator thought that he'd found some blood on this blue sweatshirt.
Though the stains turned out to be paint, it held a whole host of other incriminating evidence.
On the blue sweatshirt, which was found between where the girls were found and where Bishop lived, there were ivy spores that were consistent with where the girls had been found, but inconsistent with where it had been dumped. There were traces of fibres from the girls' clothing on the sweatshirt, which could only have got there through direct contact. There was paint on the sweatshirt that was consistent with paint that Bishop himself had used spraying friends' cars, and was also consistent with paint on the trousers that were undoubtedly Bishop. So the blue sweatshirt was absolutely central to the case.
Officers now visited Bishop's house and showed the evidence to his live-in girlfriend, Jenny Johnston. Without hesitation, she confirms the sweatshirt belongs to Bishop. It's enough for the police to arrest him.
Bishop was arrested at the end of October and, after forensic tests, charged at the beginning of December. While he continually pleaded his innocence, the girls' funerals took place. The little friends' bodies have now been buried side by side.
He's guilty of having killed these two children, and we thought, this is it.
The police are convinced they have their killer, but in the case of the Babes in the Wood murders, nothing is that simple. Bishop's trial would begin in December 1987 amid a glare of publicity and media coverage at Lewes Crown Court.
It was very much one of the biggest, if not the biggest case of the time, and was notorious.
The majority of, certainly police officers involved, thought that there was sufficient evidence to convict.
Bishop was the murderer. No doubt whatsoever.
There's links between the blue sweatshirt and the girls' clothing, fibre links, link the clothes together, which can't be explained innocently. But also, it's Bishop's own testimony that he saw the girls in a particular position, which was exactly the position that they were found in. And he has no innocent way of having seen that.
The police were confident Bishop was the killer, but the jury would return a verdict that would send shockwaves through the justice system.
After 2 hours of deliberations, a jury ended Russell Bishop's year in custody. One of his brothers relayed the verdict.
When he walked free, it was a big shock amongst the police, and we knew he was guilty, but he got off it. And we thought, what are we going to do?
Well, incredibly frustrating, because it sort of defies logic, isn't it?
The case was probably strong enough for Bishop to have been convicted. I think the fundamental issue was the way the prosecution put its case at the time.
A major issue for the case against Bishop was that his girlfriend, Jenny Johnston, had now changed her entire story. Johnston claimed her statement linking Bishop to the Pinto sweatshirt found at the murder scene was false, and that she had been bullied by the police into making it. The prosecution case would also fall apart over a basic issue of timing.
I think the biggest mistake that the prosecution make is to wed themselves to the fact that the girls were dead by 6:30. We know that a very credible witness actually saw them and waved to them 15 minutes later.
Why are the prosecution tying themselves in this way? And when you look at the summing up of the judge, he gave the jury certain steps towards their verdict, the essence of which was, unless you're sure the girls were killed before 6:30, it can't be Russell Bishop, and that's why he was acquitted within a couple of hours.
Police announced that the file will not be reopened.
With Bishop now a free man, the double jeopardy law in place at the time meant he was now immune from re-prosecution.
Bishop avoided the cameras. Negotiations have been going on with a Sunday newspaper over interviews.
He took a payout from the then News of the World. They'd paid him £15,000 as the victim of this miscarriage of justice, which by today's money is 40-odd thousand. I mean, it's not an insignificant amount. It's the lie that he has to continue.
It's one of them things which always will be brought up.
The guy that the police tried to fit up for this offence.
I remember very clearly the day after Russell Bishop was acquitted. I was here in Churchill Square. I was about to cross the road, and this van, bedecked with sort of banners saying Russell Bishop, not guilty, and there he was, standing on the back, waving his arms like he was the big I am. And it drove past, and I just felt a real deep sense of unease. I thought, there's something not right here, something really not right.
There was a cast iron certainty, certainly within the police, that Bishop had got away with it.
Which leaves the question, who is the Morscombe murderer? A vicious sex attacker who strangled two little girls yards from their homes.
In the days that followed, various groups would come forward and say, what are you going to do about trying to find the killer of these two little girls, when we knew that it was him?
With no one convicted for the murders, the victims' families are in turmoil and begin a campaign to have the case reopened. Incredibly, front and centre of the march through Brighton and standing side by side with the families is Russell Bishop.
And that's all what's been on my mind, is to get this case reopened.
He wanted to be a local hero. He liked the fame. It was purely evil, the stuff he was doing and has done over the years.
He wears a high-vis jacket, getting people to sign the petition. So he's very much the ringmaster here. What I find very interesting when you watch the video is when the reporter says to him, people think it's quite surprising, having been accused of this, that you're now marching with the families.
People are very surprised. People keep asking me, why do I keep on and on and on?
It's all about him. It's not about, well, I want to see justice done for the families or these poor girls. He never mentions the two girls, the real victims in all of this. He paints himself as the victim.
My name isn't cleared until someone else has brought to justice the real person.
I need to see this reopened so that I can clear my name. It's all about him. It's very narcissistic.
Classic psychopath behaviour.
Classic.
He was his own best publicist to deflect the attention away from him. If it wasn't so outrageous, it'd be quite clever.
In 1987, double child killer Russell Bishop had somehow managed to evade justice and walk free from court.
He got away with it. He committed the most horrendous act and killed two girls and got away with it.
Paedophile who couldn't control his urges.
He's a killer, he got off it. What is he going to do next?
This evil paedophile even had the nerve to play the victim.
Getting away with it the first time, it emboldened him.
Of course.
And it builds his confidence. And he thinks he's Teflon because he's got away with it. And not only that, he can't be retried again for it because of the double jeopardy laws. So he's home free.
He's naive, he's narcissistic. He wants to put himself in the centre of attention.
It's not just Bishop who doubles down on this deception of innocence. With him on the protest is girlfriend Jenny Johnston, who knowingly lied to keep him out of prison.
He got paid out by the News of the World, he became a mini celebrity. He was somebody for the first time in his life on the estate. And that sustains him, I think, for a while. But then his predilection and his paedophilia and his paraphilia start to boil up again.
On the 4th of February 1990, a 7-year-old girl is out roller skating on an estate in East Brighton. What's about to unfold will bear shocking similarities to the Babes in the Wood murders.
It's one of those emotive crimes. Innocent 7-year-old girl, just outside of her house in Whitehawk, was snatched off the street by an unknown person at that point, bundled into the boot of the car, driven at speed to the dyke area, where she was then dragged out of the boot of the car, taken onto the back seat and indecently assaulted. He strangled her to the point that she was unconscious. He thought that he had killed her, and he then just discarded this naked body into a hawthorn bush on a cold, freezing, horrible February night.
The victim had been left for dead, but miraculously, she survived. She's discovered 2 hours later by a passing couple.
She was seconds away from death, but she wasn't. She was alive. And she was in a terrible state, bless her.
Despite her horrific ordeal, she starts to provide crucial details about her attacker.
She spoke about the car being a red car. She spoke about the man who took her, who was much younger than her dad, but he had a moustache. She found a hammer. She started banging on the inside of the boot with the hammer, and him shouting, the driver shouting, "Shut up, stop doing that or I'll kill you." She also talked about other things she was aware of in the boot, a tin of WD-40.
The police begin to investigate known paedophiles in the local vicinity. They also have reports of a red car matching the description seen in the area. The driver, none other than Russell Bishop.
I remember taking a statement off somebody that said, you know, I saw Russell Bishop driving his car up Coldine Lane at that particular time. I asked the witness, how do you know that? And he says, well, everyone knows Russell Bishop because he's never out of the papers. So he can't really go anywhere without being spotted. If he kept a low profile, we'd be looking for a needle in a haystack when in fact he's almost presented himself on a plate to us.
And so we sent a team out there to his house to interview him. The car was still there, the car was still intact. Great. And we opened up the boot and we saw in there WD-40. We saw the hammer and all the chip marks we could also see on the lid. And we thought, we might be on a bit of a winner here.
The man being questioned about the attack is 23-year-old labourer Russell Bishop, who was cleared of the 1986 killings of 2 schoolgirl friends near Brighton. A court order was granted to detectives to question him until midnight tonight.
Somebody rang me up at home and said Russell Bishop's been arrested, and I think I do remember going, yes, yes.
With the failure of Bishop's first trial fresh in their minds, the police would leave nothing to chance.
A taxi driver saw a pair of jogging bottoms in Mill Road. Evidence on there of both Bishop and of the little girl as well. DNA evidence, which is still very much in its infancy at that stage. We found tyre tracks which later matched the tyres that were on Bishop's car.
Detectives in Brighton have been working with a sense of urgency to produce results. Now they've found her clothes after a painstaking search by hundreds of officers.
Inside the clothing itself, they found chippings from the paint underneath the boot lid. We got evidence of Bishop, got evidence, obviously, of the little girl there. And everything was there.
Bishop's solicitor, Ralph Himes, is adamant his client is innocent.
And the client still strenuously denies any involvement in this offence.
With evidence against him piling up, Bishop tries to inject some doubt into the case by demanding an identity parade.
You're talking about a man who is a psychopath. You know, there's no getting away from it. The guy is a psychopath. And he loved to think that he was the puppet master. He was orchestrating things that were going on around him.
Only 3 days after she was attacked, the 7-year-old victim will now have to be in the same room as the man who left her for dead.
I can't think of any other serial offender in history of crime that behaved in the way that Bishop did.
He's just so evil.
And I'm going to ask you in a moment to look through the window at the line of men who are sitting there.
Bishop's fate now hangs in the balance.
And they put the radios on talk-through, which means that every policeman on that channel in Brighton would hear.
I shall then ask you whether the person whom you saw on that day is here.
I think it's number 9.
She said, I think it's number 9, which was Bishop.
You think it's number 9? Thank you.
It was a drop-dead moment. It was a fabulous moment, absolutely wonderful.
You could hear people cheering. And somebody actually, on the radio, some copper, I don't know who it was, pressed it and he said, about fucking time.
With a positive identification from the 7-year-old survivor and all the supporting evidence the police have been able to compile, Bishop will now face trial on charges of kidnap, indecent assault and attempted murder.
Bishop's defence counsel claimed throughout the trial that their client had been victimised by the police after being acquitted in the same courtroom 3 years ago of the murders of 2 Brighton schoolgirls.
There was a pressure from the point of view of you've arrested Russell Bishop. If it goes skew-if and it goes wrong, it would make the Sussex police as if they were on some sort of vendetta. And of course that was his defence.
They alleged evidence against Bishop had been fabricated because of lingering doubts about the so-called Babes in the Wood murders in the Wild Park area of Brighton.
At one point they suggested I just took his car and drove it up on the dyke to make sure that the tyre tracks matched. There was even the strangest one where they suggested that I took a used condom from within his house and sprinkled the contents onto the girl's clothing in order to link him forensically to the scene.
But this time, the jury saw straight through Bishop's lies and dissembling, and without his girlfriend perjuring herself on the stand to save him, now there would be no escape.
Sentencing Bishop, the judge, Mr. Justice Nolan, said, "You are a dangerous man, perhaps more dangerous than you think." The judge said there is only one fitting sentence for attempted murder, and that is life imprisonment. This caused the public gallery to erupt into cheering and applause that drowned out the sound of Bishop sobbing in the dock.
Massive relief that a predatory sex offender like that was finally behind bars. And if he hadn't have been convicted then, he would have offended again. And probably the time gap between offences would start to get shorter because that is a typical escalation as well.
When Bishop was convicted of the kidnap and attempted murder and indecent assault, there was no celebration. We were so aware that there were 2 families still waiting for justice.
In 1987, Russell Bishop had walked free from court, acquitted of the murders of 2 9-year-old girls, Nicola Fellows and Karen Hadaway, after his girlfriend lied in court to protect him. 3 years later, Russell Bishop is finally behind bars after the abduction and attempted murder of another little girl.
A dangerous paedophile was taken off the streets because classically he would have offended again and again. And it was a big relief, but obviously not for the families of Karen and Nicola.
Bishop continues to believe he's escaped justice for the Babes in the Wood murders, as no one can be tried for the same crime twice. In 2005, however, the double jeopardy law is scrapped, and the police once again have Bishop in their sights.
What do the police need to reopen this investigation?
The key thing that they need is new and compelling evidence, and they only get one chance to present that evidence. So when the result of the blue sweatshirt examination comes back from the forensic scientists, for the first time ever, there was a 1 billion to 1 DNA hit of Russell Bishop's DNA on that sweatshirt. It's an absolute landmark moment.
The re-examination of the all-important Pinto sweatshirt found near to where the bodies of Nicola and Karen were discovered, using DNA techniques developed in the years since Bishop's original arrest and trial, seems set to nail him at last. But there's an unexpected problem.
Subsequently, the forensic scientists contact the police and say, "We're really sorry, but the sweatshirt itself has been in packaging for over 30 years, and we're not confident that that DNA match cannot be attributed to some kind of inadvertent transfer, so you can't use that in evidence."
With DNA from the Pinto sweatshirt now ruled out, The forensics team next turned their attention to sealed tapings taken by the original investigators from the Sweatshirt and from the clothes and skin of the victims. In 1986, these were used to capture fibres. Now they can be examined for DNA.
There might be skin flakes or other kind of traces of DNA that might put a stronger case and an impenetrable case.
Because they are trapped and sealed underneath the tape.
They're time capsules, if you like.
And what did they get?
On one of the tapings, on Karen Hadaway's arm, is Bishop's DNA.
Armed with new and compelling evidence, police have Russell Bishop brought from his prison cell to rearrest him for the double murder of Nicola and Karen some 3 decades after those offences.
I'm arresting you on the suspicion of the murders of Nicola Fellows and Hadaway on or around Thursday, 9th of October 1986.
He wouldn't have known what was coming that day. Bearing in mind, he thinks he's getting ready for parole. His head now is moving forward.
The grounds for arresting you are that there is fresh evidence linking you to the murders of both Nicola Fellows and Karen Hadaway.
You can kind of see the horror dawning on him that these murders of 30-odd years ago have not gone away.
With Bishop facing fresh evidence against him, he's backed into a corner, and his police interview reveals his callous, unrepentant nature.
What happened in the den?
Got no comment.
Both Karen and Nicola were sexually assaulted within that den in World Park. Tell us what happened to Nicola.
Got no comment.
Now, in terms of Karen, Nicola's family and friends, have you got anything to say about any suffering and pain that they've had to live with for the last 30 years?
I've got no comment whatsoever. Comment that.
His body language is quite dismissive.
I'm not going to sit here like I did 13 years ago and go over and over and over around in circles. Not happening. Please, crack on with your questions.
He starts off by saying, get this over with, make it quick, I've got to get back to the prison.
Get finished, please, because I need to get back to the prison.
He sits with his arms crossed at first and he's sideways onto the officers. He's almost trying to take himself away from this arena, but there's nowhere to go.
Are you now saying that whoever wore that sweatshirt murdered them girls?
There's a link. There's a strong link.
Are you officially saying that?
Soon, under pressure, Bishop's casual demeanour begins to crack.
The only evidence on that Pinto from them victims are the fibres. The Pinto and the children's clothing was examined on the same table at the same time by a police officer who admitted it under oath.
This is dominating gesture. That's what that chop means. It means I'm cutting off what you're saying. I'm cutting off any discussion about this because he's realising the tide is against him.
Where your position stands on touching Karen's forearm?
I didn't touch no one, so I'm innocent, and as I said, I've got no comment to make.
But that's what I'm asking you. You've said you didn't touch her.
Well, you've got my arms up, so right down and then move on.
So Bishop is absolutely nailed now. We've got DNA on the skin of Karen Hadaway that couldn't have got there other than during the murder.
Because if you didn't touch her...
I've got nothing to say. I'm not responsible for this. I have nothing to do with it. I'm innocent. Some fucking stuff genied up 30 years later.
This is now an unassailable case.
The Court of Appeal will now quash Bishop's original acquittal. He'll now face a second trial for the murders he was found not guilty of 30 years earlier. And this time, the prosecution is determined to secure a conviction.
Were there lessons that you got from studying the 1987 case?
We weren't going to tie ourselves down to a time of death. Don't close out avenues unnecessarily. And we weren't going to make that mistake again. And we didn't.
Forensic evidence has been re-evaluated using modern-day techniques and will be used in this trial.
Because he had to explain how it was that his DNA came to be on one of the girls' forearms. The relevant forearm was in fact trapped under the body of one of the girls, so he couldn't possibly have touched it legitimately. That just completely killed him. I had started my cross-examination of him, and I'd only begun my warm-up with him. I mean, he would have had another at least 2 days or 3 days of cross-examination to answer all the big questions. But he chucked the towel in. after about an hour and a half.
A convicted paedophile has been found guilty of murdering 2 schoolgirls found strangled and sexually assaulted near Brighton 32 years ago.
In December 2018, despite his continual denials and lies, Russell Bishop was finally found guilty of the Babes in the Wood murders and sentenced to an additional 36 years.
How did you feel when the jury returned their guilty verdict?
I would like to say I was professional about it, but I probably wasn't. Elated, happy that we were able to secure a conviction for a man who was clearly very guilty.
Yes, got him at last. We have convicted him for a heinous crime, which is quite likely he'll never come out from prison.
You know, justice delayed is justice denied, and it wasn't job done until the 2018 conviction.
But the scars left by these horrific crimes and the delay in securing the conviction will never fade, neither for the families nor for the police officers who worked on the case.
This job will stay with me until I die, and I'm sure that loads of other police officers will feel the same way. It never leaves you, it will never leave me.
I'm sorry, this does upset me. I had a nightmare where I found the girls, and as I went down, one of the girls turned and said, "Can you help us?" And that really got to me, because I couldn't, because they were dead, you know.
Russell Bishop wasn't the only person to be jailed. In May 2021, Bishop's girlfriend, Jenny Johnston, who had lied in court to protect him at the original trial, would be found guilty of perjury and sentenced to 6 years.
I think it's quite right that she was charged and convicted. Had she not withdrawn her evidence and accused the police of pressurising her in the first trial, then maybe that would have been the extra bit that was needed to have him convicted in the first case.
And then the little girl would never have been harmed in the first place.
Absolutely.
The sentence that she's now serving is a lesson to all that, you know, the criminal justice system relies on truth. The lies that she told could have been put right, either at the trial or in the subsequent decades, and she didn't take that opportunity.
You know, there's a dark final twist to the story. I mean, who would have thought it? This is the headline of today's Argus newspaper. Open the trap door and let him fall into hell. Russell Bishop has just been diagnosed with terminal cancer and has only a short time left to live. Some will say good riddance, some will say it's karma. But I can't help feeling a little conflicted. In a final dark twist in this sad and horrible story, is Russell Bishop once more somehow cheating justice just a little?